My name's James Duval. I'm a visiting fellow at Chatham House. I've written an article for The World today looking at comparing the British experiences of the First World War and our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So we're standing here in front of the statue of Field Marshal Haig, who was perhaps the most famous and notorious general of the First World War, and one of the principal targets for blame after the war. And blame actually which came to him was directed at him from the politicians who he worked with during the war. What happened after the First World War is there was a really intense debate in Britain about who was responsible, about how the generals and the politicians really worked together. And the public was of course extremely interested because the casualties had been so high. Now, what happened in 1914, 1918 and after that was that the generals and the politicians both published their own accounts. There was a sort of battle of memoirs where both sides really got to state what their objections were. And the Prime Minister during the latter bit of the First World War, Lloyd George, said that really the generals were to blame for this rather futile sort of approach to the Western Front in particular, where they really sent waves and waves of ill-trained, poor private soldiers off to be shot down by the German machine guns. It sort of led to this idea of the lions being led by donkeys. And the generals after the war had their opportunity to say this was not a fair account. But of course it was the lions led by donkeys which really got into the public consciousness. Now we're having the same sort of debate after our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, except whereas after the First World War it was the generals who were held to blame, really now it's the politicians who are held to blame. It's futile to blame either one set of individuals or one set of institutions, either the politicians or the generals. What seems to have happened in Iraq and Afghanistan was actually you had a failure of the whole system, the system of government. And it's not nearly so glamorous or interesting or dramatic as saying that it was all the politicians or all the generals. But actually, if you really want to avoid making these sort of mistakes again in the future, you need to look at this sort of nuts and bolts of how decisions actually were taken. Of course, there's no absolute guide, and the differences between World War I and Iraq and Afghanistan are also very, very striking. Looking at the First World War does make you aware that this is a genuine issue. In fact, it's always been an issue. We just seem to have forgotten it when we're looking at Iraq and Afghanistan. And if we just remember the way that people discussed and debated things after the First World War, I think that is a useful lesson for us now.